Imagine a calendar on your wall. The year is 1492. When you hear that date, what comes to mind? Likely, you think of ships. You think of Christopher Columbus sailing the ocean blue. You think of maps expanding and the world getting bigger. We call this era the Renaissance, or the Rebirth. It sounds glorious, doesn't it? It sounds like a time of art, sculpture, and golden light. But if we zoom into the streets of London or Florence in that same decade, the smell is not of sea salt or fresh paint. The smell is vinegar, burnt herbs, and fear. Welcome to the London Gritty Chronicles. I am your guide through the fog of history. Today, we are not looking at the famous explorers on the horizon. We are looking at the invisible invaders in the bedroom and the marketplace. We are traveling to the turn of the 16th century, the 1490s and 1500s. This is a story about how Europe survived a double assault, the return of the Old Black Death and the arrival of a terrifying new plague. It is a story about how terror changed the way we think. And for you, the learner, this is a masterclass in synthesis. Synthesis. Listen to that word. Synthesis means combining different ideas or things to make a whole. In history and in advanced English, we do not just list dates, we connect them. We show how a disease in Italy changed a law in England. By the end of this series, you will know how to weave complex threads into a clear tapestry. Let us begin with the silence. It is 1499. We are standing on the banks of the River Thames in London. Usually, this river is a highway of noise. You would hear watermen shouting, merchants haggling over wool, and the bells of 100 churches ringing. But in 1499, the city feels hollow. The king, Henry VII, has packed his bags. He has fled across the Channel to Calais. Why would a king leave his own capital? Because the air itself has turned against him. The plague has returned. Many people believe the Black Death happened once in 1348 and then vanished. That is a myth. The plague was not a visitor. It was a resident. It was endemic. Here is your first key term, endemic. If a disease is endemic, it is regularly found in a certain area or among a particular people. It never fully leaves. It sleeps in the walls, in the rats, in the soil, waiting to wake up. In the late 1400s, Londoners lived in a cycle of dread. They knew the signs. First, the rats died. Then the sudden fever. Then the swellings in the armpits or groin, the buboes. This was the old enemy. They had a script for this. They knew they had to pray, burn aromatic woods to cleanse the air, and run away if they were rich. But as the century turned, something strange happened. The script broke. While London was emptying out due to the old plague, a new horror was marching north from Italy. This brings us to a crucial English structure, the language of contrast. We use words like simultaneously or conversely to show two different things happening at once. Simultaneously, in 1495, soldiers were returning from a war in Naples. They brought back more than just stories. They brought a disease that no doctor had ever seen before. It started with ulcers. It caused flesh to rot while the victim was still alive. It struck the bones. They called it the Great Pox. Today, we know it as syphilis. Clack, pull, clack, pull. This is the rhythm of the printing press. In a cramped workshop in Venice or London, a man pulls a heavy lever. A metal plate presses down on paper. When he lifts it, he has created something dangerous. He has created a copy. And then another. And another. In the 1490s and early 1500s, Europe was dealing with two types of viral spread. One was biological, the bacteria moving through fleas and blood. The other was informational, ideas moving through ink and paper. This brings us to a powerful English metaphor, the vector. In biology, a vector is the carrier of a disease, like the rat or the mosquito. In communication, a vector is the method used to pass information, like the pamphlet or the book. You can say, rats were the vector for the plague, while the printing press was the vector for revolutionary ideas. Why does this matter? Because the new disease we mentioned, the Great Pox or syphilis, arrived at the exact moment the printing press became powerful. It was history's first media epidemic. Imagine you are a doctor in 1500. You are terrified. This new pox is eating your patients alive. You run to your bookshelf. You pull down the works of Galen, the Greek physician who had been the ultimate authority for 1,300 years. You search the index. You look for ulcers, rotting flesh, madness. You find nothing. The book is silent. The authority has no answer. This is the moment the world cracked. For over 1,000 years, European knowledge was based on deduction. Deduction means starting with a general truth from a book and applying it to a specific case. Example: Galen says all fevers come from an imbalance of humors. You have a fever, therefore your humors are unbalanced. But the Great Pox didn't fit. It forced doctors to switch to induction. Induction means looking at specific evidence and creating a new truth. Example: Galen says nothing about this, but I see 50 soldiers with the same sores. Therefore, this is something new. This shift from deduction, trusting the old, to induction, trusting your eyes, is the birth of modern science. And it happened because of a disaster. The printing press accelerated this. Suddenly, doctors could publish their own observations. They didn't need to copy the Greeks. A doctor in Germany could write a pamphlet saying, "The mercury cure works," and a doctor in England could read it a month later. But here is the accidental twist. The press didn't just spread truth, it spread panic. Pamphlets flooded the streets with terrifying woodcut images. They showed skeleton armies marching on towns. They showed syphilitic demons. They claimed the disease was a curse from God, or a plot by the French, or the result of women breathing toxic air. The printing press was an uncontrolled fire hose of information. It mixed science, superstition, and blame into a confusing mess. Let's look at the word disseminate. It comes from the Latin word for seed, semen. To disseminate means to spread information widely, like a farmer throwing seeds across a field. Usage. The printing press allowed radical ideas to disseminate across Europe. In the chaos of the early 1500s, the seeds of doubt were planted. People began to ask, if the ancient books were wrong about the pox, what else were they wrong about? Were they wrong about the stars? Were they wrong about the shape of the earth? Were they wrong about the soul? The authorities, the church and the crown, tried to control this. They tried to censor the books, just as they tried to quarantine the bodies. But you cannot quarantine an idea once it is printed 500 times. We are seeing a society in flux. Flux means continuous change. Nothing is stable. The medical system is breaking, the information system is exploding, and the death toll is still rising. But amidst this chaos, a new kind of thinker began to emerge. These were men who looked at the dying not with pity, but with curiosity. They didn't want to pray away the plague. They wanted to dissect it. In the next part, we will meet the rebels of medicine. We will look at the grisly reality of early anatomy, the cutting open of bodies to see what lies beneath. We will learn the language of inquiry and skepticism. And we will see how the very first map of the human body was drawn, not by a priest, but by an artist. The books failed us. Now, we must look inside ourselves. Literally. The smell of a basement in winter is distinct. It is cold, damp, and smells of wet stone. But in the early 1500s, in the back rooms of Florence, London, and Paris, there was another smell mixing with the mold. It was the metallic tang of blood and the sharp scent of fear. We are entering the era of the knife. While the printing presses were clattering above ground, a silent revolution was happening underground. To understand the plague and to understand the human form, a few brave souls decided they had to look inside the machine. They had to perform dissections. Imagine you are standing in a candle-lit room. A body lies on a wooden table. It is a criminal, recently hanged. Beside him stands a man with a knife. This is not a murderer. This is an artist, or perhaps a radical doctor. He is doing something illegal. He is peeling back the skin to see the muscles underneath. For over 1,000 years, the church had strictly controlled the cutting of human bodies. It was considered a desecration. But remember the great pox from Part 1? Remember the failure of the ancient books? The desperation to understand why people were dying led to a cracking of religious rules. This brings us to a critical English concept: dogma. Dogma refers to a principle or set of beliefs laid down by an authority as incontrovertibly true. You accept dogma without question. Example: the dogma of the time said the liver had 5 lobes. In the 1500s, the dogma was crumbling. When these early anatomists cut open a human, they looked at the liver. They counted the lobes. They found 2, not 5. Galen had dissected pigs, which have 5 lobes. He assumed humans were the same. This moment, the knife revealing the truth, is the birth of empirical evidence. Empirical means based on observation or experience, rather than theory or pure logic. Usage: the doctor rejected the dogma and relied on empirical evidence from the autopsy. This is a massive shift in synthesis. Before, truth came from the past, ancient texts. Now, truth comes from the present, what I can see right now. The accidental twist here is who led this charge. It wasn't always the university professors. It was often the artists. Men like Leonardo da Vinci in the late 1400s and early 1500s were obsessed with the human form. To paint a realistic arm, they needed to know how the muscle connected to the bone. So, art drove science. The desire for beauty led to the discovery of biology. Let's practice a cause and effect structure. Structure. Driven by motivation, subject began to action, which resulted in outcome. Example. Driven by a need for realism, artists began to dissect bodies, which resulted in a more accurate map of human anatomy. Suddenly, the interior world was being mapped. The veins, the nerves, the organs, they were drawn with ink and printed on the presses we discussed in Part 3. But there was a dark irony. While they were mapping the healthy body to understand life, the streets outside were still filled with the dead. The bills of mortality were growing longer. The searchers were still marking doors with red crosses. The new science of anatomy could describe the body, but it could not yet save it. The emotional wave here moves from the excitement of discovery to the frustration of impotence. You know how the machine works, but you don't know how to fix it. It is like opening the hood of a broken car, admiring the engine, but having no tools to repair it. This frustration created a pressure cooker. If we can challenge the map of the body, what other maps can we challenge? If the ancient Greeks were wrong about the liver, were they wrong about the ocean? In the 1490s and 1500s, the world was expanding in two directions at once. It was going microscopic into the body and macroscopic across the globe. This brings us to our next great connection. The ships that brought the plague also brought news of a new world. The same questioning spirit that drove the knife into the cadaver drove the prow of the ship into the Atlantic. In the next part, we are going to leave the dark basement. We are going to step onto the deck of a ship. We will see how the plague mentality, the fear of the invisible, traveled across the ocean. We will learn the language of exploration and colonization, and we will see how a sneeze in Europe could topple an empire in the Americas. The body has been opened. Now, the map of the world is about to be torn in half. The salt air stings your eyes. The horizon is a flat blue line that never ends. We are leaving the claustrophobic basement of the anatomist. We are stepping onto the heaving deck of a wooden caravel. The year is 1492, then 1498, then 1500. While doctors in London and Florence were cutting open bodies to find the truth inside, sailors were cutting through the Atlantic to find the truth outside. This brings us to the most significant synthesis of our story so far. Structure. Just as Event A challenged Authority A, so too did Event B challenge Authority B. Usage. Just as the dissection knife challenged the medical books, so too did the ship's compass challenge the geography books. For centuries, the Bible and the ancient Greek geographer Ptolemy defined the world. They said there were 3 continents: Europe, Africa, and Asia. That was it. That was the dogma. But when Christopher Columbus, and later Amerigo Vespucci, returned with descriptions of a new world, they didn't just bring back gold. They brought back a massive intellectual problem. If these lands existed, why didn't God mention them? If these people existed, whose descendants were they? This crisis of authority mirrors the plague crisis. In the hospital, the old cures didn't work. On the map, the old coordinates didn't work. This is what we call a paradigm shift. Paradigm is a typical example or pattern of something, a model. A paradigm shift is a fundamental change in approach or underlying assumptions. The 1500s was the century of the paradigm shift. The paradigm that the ancients knew everything was shattering. But let's look at the biology to society mirror. The ships were vectors. Remember that word from part 3? They carried men, yes, but they also carried invisible passengers. In the 1490s, as ships traveled back and forth, they unleashed a biological exchange that changed the human species forever. Historians call this the Columbian Exchange. It wasn't a trade, it was a collision. Europe sent smallpox, influenza, and measles to the Americas. The Americas, likely, sent the Great Pox, syphilis, back to Europe. Note: historians debate the exact origin of syphilis, but the timing of the outbreak in 1495 suggests a strong link to the returning ships. Use this English phrase for cause and effect: unintended consequences. Definition: outcomes of a purposeful action that are not intended or foreseen. Context: the explorers intended to find a trade route to India. The unintended consequence was a global biological war. Imagine the sailor in 1495. He walks off the ship in Naples or Cadiz. He feels a sore on his lip. He thinks nothing of it. He kisses his wife. She visits the market. She coughs near the baker. The network of infection was now global. The bacteria did not care about the New World or the Old World. To a germ, a human body is just a host, whether it is in Tenochtitlan or Toledo. This terrified the average European. The world was suddenly too big. The map had holes in it. The diseases were new and strange. The emotional wave here is disorientation. Have you ever woken up in a room you don't recognize? For a moment, you panic. You don't know where the door is. That was the collective feeling of Europe in 1500. The safe, small world of the Middle Ages was gone. The door was missing. So, how did people cope? When the map breaks and the body breaks, where do you turn? You turn to the only thing left: control. If you cannot control the size of the world, you try to control the people in it. The 1500s saw a rise in bureaucracy, in lists, in categories. We saw the bills of mortality in London, counting the dead. Now we see the colonial administration, counting the new subjects. The Spanish crown didn't just send soldiers, they sent notaries. They sent men with ink and paper to write down everything. They needed to catalogue this chaos. This connects back to our theme of observation. The explorers were like the anatomists. The anatomist catalogued the organs. The explorer catalogued the islands. Both were trying to impose order on a reality that was messy and frightening. But there is one more twist. As the ship sailed, they needed better tools. They needed better astronomy to navigate the stars. And who was watching the stars? A Polish priest named Copernicus. In the next part, we will leave the ocean and look up at the sky. We will see how the need to navigate the globe forced us to rethink the universe itself. We will learn the language of revolution in the literal sense, and we will see how the final authority, the Earth's place in the center of everything, was about to be destroyed. The body is open. The map is torn. Now the sky is falling. It is night. The streets of Bologna, Italy, are dark and quiet, except for the occasional cough of a sick beggar. But high up in a tower, a young man is awake. His name is Nicholas Copernicus. The year is 1497. While the doctors below are fighting the great pox, Copernicus is fighting a different kind of infection, an error in the math of the universe. We have looked at the body, part 4. We have looked at the map of the world, part 5. Now, we must look up. This brings us to the ultimate paradigm shift of the 1500s. Definition: a fundamental change in the basic concepts and experimental practices of a scientific discipline. Usage: Copernicus initiated a paradigm shift that moved the Earth from the center of the universe. In the late 1400s, the Catholic Church had a problem. It wasn't just the plague, it was the calendar. The date of Easter was drifting. The Julian calendar, used since Roman times, was slightly off. Over centuries, those minutes added up to days. The spring equinox was arriving too early. To fix the calendar, the Church asked astronomers to observe the stars more closely. This connects perfectly to our theme: observation. The Church asked for data to fix a holiday, but they got a revolution. Copernicus looked at the data. He looked at the planets, Mars, Venus, Jupiter. According to the ancient Greek model, the geocentric model, the Earth was stationary in the center, and everything spun around us. Geo means Earth. Centric means center. Concept: the geocentric model put humanity at the center of God's attention. But when Copernicus tracked the planets, their movement was messy. Mars would sometimes stop and go backward, retrograde motion. To explain this, the ancients invented complex loops called epicycles. Copernicus, much like the anatomists we met in part 4, saw that the body of the universe was too ugly. It didn't make sense. It was cluttered. Then he had a dangerous thought. What if we are moving? Imagine the vertigo. You are standing on a stone floor. It feels solid. But this young Polish priest is telling you that you are actually spinning at 1,000 miles per hour. He placed the sun in the center. This is the heliocentric model. Helio means sun. This wasn't just math. This was a demotion. If the Earth is just another rock spinning around the sun, then we are not special. We are not the center of the stage. We are just one of the actors. Let's look at the word revolution. In astronomy, a revolution is a single orbit of a celestial body. For example, the Earth revolves around the sun. In politics, a revolution is the forcible overthrow of a government or social order. In the 1500s, these two meanings collided. Copernicus wrote his ideas down in a manuscript called Commentariolus around 1514, but he conceived them earlier. He knew his revolution of the planets would cause a revolution in the Church. So, what did he do? He hesitated. This is the emotional wave of the scholar. Fear. Copernicus did not publish his main work until he was on his deathbed in 1543. Why? Because challenging the authority of the Bible, the sun stood still, was dangerous. Remember the printing press from part 3? It could spread ideas, but it could also spread evidence for a trial. Let's practice a synthesis sentence using to call into question. Structure. By proposing new idea, subject called into question the authority of old institution. Example. By proposing a sun-centered universe, Copernicus called into question the authority of the Church and the ancient Greeks. The 1500s were a time when every single authority was being called into question. The doctor? wrong about the pox. The map maker, wrong about the Americas. The priest, wrong about the stars. The average person in 1520 must have felt incredibly insecure. The ground was moving beneath their feet, literally, according to Copernicus. But notice the accidental twist. The church actually encouraged this astronomy at first, because they needed the calendar fixed. They accidentally funded the discovery that would undermine them. This brings us to a crucial English idiom, to open a Pandora's box, meaning to start something that causes many unforeseen problems. Usage. The church opened a Pandora's box when they asked astronomers to correct the calendar. As the 1500s progressed, the control we saw in Part 2, quarantine, and Part 5, colonial administration, tried to extend to the mind. The authorities created the Index of Prohibited Books. They tried to quarantine thoughts just as they quarantined plague victims. But a new challenge was rising in Germany. A monk named Martin Luther was looking at the church's selling of forgiveness, indulgences, and, just like the anatomist looking at the liver, he said, "This is not in the book." In the next part, we will see the ultimate collision. We will see how the viral spread of the plague mirrored the viral spread of the Protestant Reformation. We will learn the language of dissent and reform. And we will see what happens when a population that has survived the Black Death decides it no longer fears hell. The stars have moved. Now, the altars are about to burn. Clang, clang, clang. The sound of a hammer hitting a nail. In 1517, in a small German town called Wittenberg, a monk named Martin Luther walked up to the heavy wooden door of the castle church. He nailed a piece of paper to it. He did not know it, but those hammer blows would be heard around the world. They would echo louder than the cannons of any army. They would shatter the unity of Europe. We have seen the body dissected, Part 4. We have seen the map redrawn, Part 5. We have seen the universe rearranged, Part 6. Now, the final authority, the church itself, is about to be broken. This is the story of the Reformation. Martin Luther was not trying to destroy the church. He was trying to fix it. He was a devout Catholic. But he saw something that disgusted him: the sale of indulgences. Here is a key historical term: indulgence. Definition: a grant by the Pope that reduced the amount of punishment one had to undergo for sins. Context: in the 1500s, preachers were traveling through towns selling these papers like merchants. They said, "As soon as the coin in the coffer rings, the soul from purgatory springs." Think back to the biology to society mirror. Why were people buying these papers? Because of the fear of death. Remember the plague. Remember the bills of mortality. Death was everywhere. The church monetized that fear. Luther looked at this and said, "This is not in the book." Just like the anatomist who couldn't find the 5-lobed liver in the human body, Luther couldn't find selling forgiveness in the Bible. He wrote 95 arguments, theses, against it. This brings us to the word dissent. Definition: the expression of opinions that are at odds with those officially held. Usage: Luther's dissent sparked a religious revolution. But here is the accidental twist. Luther wrote in Latin. He was speaking to other scholars. He wanted a debate, not a war. But someone, we don't know who, took his Latin paper. They translated it into German, and they took it to the printing press. Within 2 weeks, Luther's 95 theses were known throughout Germany. Within a month, they were known throughout Europe. Luther had gone viral. This is the perfect example of a synthesis between technology and ideology. Structure. Without technology, idea would have remained local. With it, it became global. Example. Without the printing press, Luther's dissent would have remained a local dispute. With it, it became a global Reformation. The Church's reaction was fascinating. They used the language of disease. They called Luther's ideas a plague. They called him a cancer that needed to be cut out. They were right to be afraid. The infection of questioning authority was spreading faster than the great pox. Let's look at the phrase, to challenge the status quo. Status quo is Latin for the state in which. It means the existing state of affairs, especially regarding social or political issues. Usage. The Reformation challenged the status quo of the Catholic Church. When you challenge the status quo in the 1500s, you don't just get a bad review. You get burned at the stake. Luther was summoned to a trial, the Diet of Worms. The emperor and the church officials demanded he recant, take back his words. Luther stood there, a single monk against the most powerful empire in the world, and said, "Unless I am convinced by the testimony of the Scriptures or by clear reason, I am bound by the Scriptures. I cannot and will not recant anything." This is the moment the modern individual was born. He said, "My conscience is more important than your authority." But words have consequences. Unintended consequences. Luther wanted to free the soul, but the peasants who heard him wanted to free their bodies. They heard freedom and thought it meant no more taxes and no more landlords. In 1524, the Peasants' War erupted. It was a bloodbath. Over 100,000 peasants were slaughtered. They carried flags with Luther's words, but Luther was horrified. He told the princes to crush them. This creates a complex emotional wave. We feel the triumph of the individual standing up for truth. Then we feel the horror of the slaughter that followed. The 1500s were teaching Europe a hard lesson. Ideas have a body count. By the mid-1500s, Europe was divided. You were either Catholic or Protestant. This division would lead to 100 years of religious wars. But amidst the fighting, something else was happening. The skepticism we saw in the anatomy lab was moving into the courtroom. If we can question the Pope, can we question the King? Can we question the law? We are seeing a society that is learning to synthesize doubt. Concept. Doubt is no longer a sin. It is a method. Usage. Skepticism became a tool for progress, allowing thinkers to question ancient dogmas. The plague had taught them that death was random. The anatomists had taught them that the body was a machine. The explorers had taught them the world was vast. Luther taught them that authority could be wrong. So, what is left? If you strip away the church, the ancients, and the map, what remains? The answer is the method. In the next part, we will see how all these threads, disease, distance, dissection, and dissent, wove together to create a new way of thinking. We will meet the man who tried to organize this chaos into a scientific method. We will learn the language of hypothesis and experiment. And we will see how the 1500s ended not with a whimper, but with the invention of the future. The walls are down. The roof is off. Now we must build a new house. The year is 1543. If you ever travel back in time, mark this date in red ink. In a printing shop in Basel, Switzerland, a massive book is being bound. It is filled with incredibly detailed drawings of muscles, nerves, and bones. It is written by Andreas Vesalius, the anatomist we hinted at earlier. Its title is De Humani Corporis Fabrica, on the fabric of the human body. At the exact same moment, in a distinct part of Europe, Frombork, Poland, an old man lies dying. On his deathbed, his friends place a freshly printed book in his hands. He touches the cover, smiles, and then takes his last breath. That man is Nicholas Copernicus. His book is De Revolutionibus Orbium Coelestium, on the revolutions of the heavenly spheres. This is one of the greatest coincidences in human history. In the same year, the human race received a new map of the body, looking down, and a new map of the universe, looking up. Both books did the same thing. They looked the ancient authorities in the eye and said, "You are wrong." We have arrived at the convergence. This is a powerful English noun, convergence. Definition: the process of two or more things coming together to form a new whole. Usage: the convergence of the printing press, the plague, and new exploration created a scientific revolution. In Part 8, we are seeing the results of the chaos from the 1490s. The fear has turned into focus. The panic has turned into process. Think about the journey we have taken. The plague broke the trust in prayer alone. The great pox broke the trust in ancient medicine. The explorers broke the trust in ancient geography. The Reformation broke the trust in the church. So, what happens when all the trust is broken? You are standing in the rubble of your beliefs. You have two choices: despair or build something new. Europe chose to build, and the tool they used was skepticism. In modern English, being skeptical often means being negative or cynical. Common usage: I am skeptical that this diet works. I doubt it. But in the 16th century, skepticism was a philosophical weapon. It meant suspending judgment until you had proof. It wasn't about being negative, it was about being careful. This brings us to a crucial legal and scientific phrase: the burden of proof. Definition: the obligation to prove one's assertion. Context: before 1500, the burden of proof was on the innovator. If you said the earth moved, you had to prove the Bible was wrong, which was impossible. Shift. After 1543, the burden of proof began to shift to the authority. If the book says the liver has 5 lobes, the book must prove it. If the body shows 2, the body wins. This is the mental shift that allowed science to breathe. Imagine the library of a scholar in 1550. It is no longer a shrine to the past. It is a workshop. The books are open, but there are notes in the margins. There are crossed-out minds. We are seeing the birth of the hypothesis. Definition: a proposed explanation made on the basis of limited evidence as a starting point for further investigation. Usage. Copernicus formed a hypothesis that the Earth revolved around the Sun, but he needed more data to prove it. Before this era, people dealt in dogma, absolute truth. Now they dealt in hypothesis, possible truth. This change was terrifying for many. If truth is just a hypothesis, then truth can change. And if truth can change, then society is unstable. And society was unstable. While the scientists were high-fiving over their new books, the streets were burning. The convergence of these ideas didn't just stay in the universities. It leaked out into politics. If a peasant can question a priest and a doctor can question Galen, can a subject question a king? The 1500s were not just a time of scientific revolution. They were a time of political hardening. The kings saw the chaos. They saw the Reformation tearing nations apart. They saw the plague killing their taxpayers, so they reacted with absolutism. This is our next key term: absolutism. Definition: the acceptance of or belief in absolute principles in political, philosophical, ethical, or theological matters. Context: in history, it refers to monarchs, kings, queens, holding total power. It is a paradox. Concept: paradox, a seemingly absurd or self-contradictory statement or proposition that when investigated or explained may prove to be well-founded. The paradox: as the mind became freer, science/religion, the state became stricter, absolute monarchy. The kings of the late 1500s, like Philip II of Spain or Elizabeth I of England, had to be stronger than ever to hold their nations together. They used the new data from the bills of mortality to tax and control. They used the printing press to spread propaganda. They tried to put the genie back in the bottle. But you cannot unsee the moons of Jupiter. You cannot unsee the valves of the heart. In the next part, we will watch the final struggle of the 1500s. We will see how this new scientific mindset clashed with the ultimate magical mindset: the witch trials. We will see how a society obsessed with finding hidden causes turned its gaze toward its own neighbors. We will learn the language of scapegoat and hysteria. The books have been written, but the fire is not done with us yet. The fire crackles in the town square. It is not a bonfire for celebration. It is a pyre for execution. The year is 1580. We are in a small town in England, or perhaps Germany. The scientific revolution is well underway. Vesalius has mapped the body. Copernicus has mapped the stars. But here, on the ground, the mood is not one of enlightenment. It is one of terror. We have reached the darkest paradox of the 1500s. While elite minds discovered laws of gravity and anatomy, common people were obsessed with a different kind of hidden law: witchcraft. This brings us to a terrifying English concept: hysteria. Definition: exaggerated or uncontrollable emotion or excitement, especially among a group of people. The fear of the plague and the devil fueled mass hysteria. You might think that as science advanced, superstition would retreat. That is a logical assumption. But history is rarely logical. In fact, The Great Witch Hunt peaked during the Renaissance, not in the Dark Ages. Why? Because of anxiety. Think back to Part 1 and Part 7. The world was falling apart. The plague was still killing people randomly. The Reformation had shattered religious certainty. The economy was changing due to New World gold, inflation. When a cow died suddenly, or a child fell sick with a fever that new doctors couldn't explain, people didn't want a hypothesis. They wanted a culprit. They wanted someone to blame. This gives us the word scapegoat. Definition: a person who is blamed for the wrongdoings, mistakes, or faults of others. Etymology: in the Bible, a goat was sent into the wilderness to carry away the sins of the community. Context: in the 1500s, the scapegoat was often the vulnerable, the elderly widow, the poor woman with a sharp tongue, or the outcast. The biology to society mirror here is chilling. Just as the searchers in London looked for physical tokens of the plague on a body, the witch finders looked for the devil's mark on a suspect. They stripped women naked. They shaved their heads. They used long needles to prick their skin, looking for a spot that didn't bleed. This was a perversion of the scientific method we discussed in Part 8. They were observing. They were testing. They were gathering evidence. But their premise was flawed. This connects to a vital critical thinking phrase. Correlation does not imply causation. Meaning, just because two things happen at the same time, it does not mean one caused the other. Example: the neighbor walked by, and then the milk soured. That is a correlation. But the neighbor did not cause the milk to sour. In the frantic mind of the 16th century villager, correlation was causation. She looked at me, and I got sick. Therefore, she is a witch. The accidental twist involves our old friend, the printing press. Part 3. Just as the press spread Luther's Bible and Vesalius's Anatomy, it also spread a book called the Malleus Maleficarum, the Hammer of Witches. This was a manual on how to hunt witches. The press did not discriminate between truth and madness. It amplified both. The courts, the state machinery we saw rising in Part 2, stepped in to regulate this madness. Witchcraft became a statutory crime. It wasn't just a sin against God. It was a felony against the king. By the late 1500s, thousands of people, mostly women, had been executed. The smoke of the witch trials mixed with the smoke of the plague fires. But let's look closer at the emotional wave. This wasn't just hate. It was a desperate attempt to regain control. If you can find the witch, you can stop the bad things from happening. It is a comforting lie. It tells you that the world makes sense, that evil has a name and a face, and that you can burn it. But the 1600s were approaching, and with the turn of the century, a new kind of synthesis was about to emerge. The fever of the witch trials would eventually break. The empirical evidence, Part 4, that once condemned women would eventually be used to exonerate them. Judges would start to ask, is this spectral evidence real? Can we trust a witness who claims to see a ghost? The answer would come from the development of reason. We are now standing at the edge of the 1500s. We have survived the Black Death, the Great Pox, the religious wars, and the witch hunts. The population of Europe is battered, scarred, and cynical. but they are also smarter. They are tougher. They have learned to question the doctor, the map maker, the priest, and the king. So, what is the final lesson? How do we wrap up a century that destroyed everything we knew and built the modern world from the ashes? In the final part, we will bring it all home. We will synthesize the 10 parts into one powerful framework for understanding history. We will look at the legacy of this gritty era, and I will give you the ultimate checklist for connecting trends. The fire is dying down. The dawn of the 1600s is grey and cold. But the light is different now. It is the light of the modern mind. The year is 1600. We are back on the banks of the River Thames. The silence of 1499 is gone. The city is roaring again. But look closely at the crowd. The people walking these streets are different from their grandparents. A merchant walks by, reading a pamphlet about a trade war with Spain. A doctor walks by, carrying a book with diagrams of the human heart. A sailor walks by, smoking tobacco from a land that wasn't on the map a century ago. We have reached the end of our journey through the gritty chronicles of the 1500s. We have watched a civilization survive a near-death experience and come out the other side changed forever. Let's practice the ultimate English skill, retrospective synthesis. Retrospective means looking back on or dealing with past events or situations. Usage. In retrospect, the crises of the 1500s were the birth pangs of the modern world. Think about the chain reaction we uncovered. The biological shock. The plague and the Great Pox proved the ancient medical books were wrong. The information shock, the printing press, spread this doubt and the new data faster than the authorities could stop it. The geographical shock. The discovery of the Americas broke the ancient maps. The religious shock. The Reformation broke the spiritual monopoly of the Church. The scientific shock. Copernicus moved the earth itself. When you put these 5 shocks together, you get a society that had to reinvent authority. Before 1500, authority came from the past. Aristotle, Galen, the Bible. After 1600, authority began to shift to the process: observation, experiment, evidence. This is the legacy of the era. Legacy is what is left behind or handed down from the past. Context. The legacy of the 1500s isn't just the art of Michelangelo. It is the skepticism of the scientist. It is the grit of the survivor. But remember the cost. We must never romanticize history. The Renaissance sounds beautiful, but for the person living through it, it was often a nightmare. We saw the witch hunts, Part 9, as a desperate attempt to regain control in a chaotic world. We saw the syphilis outbreak, Part 1, disfigure a generation. We saw the wars of religion, Part 7, turn neighbors into enemies. This brings us to our final English concept: resilience. Definition: the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties. Toughness. Usage. The resilience of the human spirit allowed society to adapt to the traumas of the 16th century. The people of London, Florence, and Wittenberg didn't give up. When the plague came, they rebuilt the walls. When the old science failed, they invented new science. When the world got too big, they built better ships. So, the next time you hear the date 1492 or 1500, don't just think of a statue in a museum. Think of the smell of vinegar in a quarantined house. Think of the ink on a banned book. Think of the astronomer squinting at a star that shouldn't be there. You now possess the vocabulary to describe this transformation. You can use words like endemic, paradigm shift, dogma, empirical, and convergence. You can explain that history is not a straight line of progress. It is a messy, gritty cycle of disaster and adaptation. The 1500s taught us that when the world breaks, we have the power to put it back together differently. This has been the London Gritty Chronicles. The fog is lifting. The modern world has begun.